Thanks, Andy. So I want to thank Andy and Gloria for inviting me to this wonderful event and putting on another great show for us. And all of you for coming today to observe all of this. So, as Andy said, I've worked on the emotion fear for a long time. And she asked me to talk about fear today to sort of tell you a bit about how fear monopolizes your brain. That's something we can all appreciate. Once a fear comes into your head, it's hard to get rid of it because it sort of takes over your mind, your consciousness, your life. And we heard a bit about that from Martha today when she was talking about her seizures coming out. And I'll actually, if Martha doesn't mind, use some of this to, some of the things I'm going to show you to illustrate this. And I promise not to get too technical here, though. So here we see that there's some thread out in the world that is going into the brain. And in order to get into your brain, it has to go through sensory systems, obviously. And then it gets to this part of the brain called the amygdala, which I've worked on a lot. And Martha mentioned this as part of her epileptic surgery. And once it gets to the amygdala, one thing begins to happen is that it sends messages down to the body. These messages include commands to, for example, freeze. You're about to step on a snake, and your brain sees that, and you step on it before you even know that there's a snake there, because there are rapid pathways for transmitting these signals about the outside world into the amygdala to initiate those really rapid responses. These are basically hardwired responses that are put into your brain by evolution and that exist in many animals. Now, in addition, though, the sensory systems are giving rise to connections to cortical areas, to the neocortex, where we can think and reason, decide, plan, make decisions, appraise, talk about, and do all of the great things that we think of the brain as doing. And so that is setting up a kind of cognitive representation of the event. But you're also getting information from the amygdala going into that cognitive representation. And just hold that in mind for a while. And in addition, you're activating systems that control what we call goal-directed behavior. So here, these are reactions. You see the snake, your brain sees the snake, you freeze, but now you're going to decide to do something. Run away, beat the snake, do whatever you're going to do. It's going to be a decision that you've made or that your brain has made. It's still not conscious probably, but it's a decision that you make to do something on the basis of past experience. You have these kinds of actions that you've learned how to do. And so you perform those actions, and that may, in the future, help you avoid danger. For example, you see the snake at some distance, so rather than having to freeze and do all those things, you just turn and walk the other way. So all of that is beginning to take place in your brain, and you're getting that information going up into cortex as well. But there's a lot of interaction between all of these systems. So the bodily responses, feedback. And so when Martha said her seizures started in her chest, or her experience from the seizure started in her chest. So the amygdala is perhaps the source of the seizure, and so that's generating these physical sensations in the body, these responses in the body, that then are going to feed back to the brain. And then it's going to begin to affect her cognitive processes, where she actually begins to experience all this. In addition, there are all kinds of, I don't have lines on it here, but there are responses, outputs of the amygdala going to what's called arousal systems that release neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin and so forth. And these rev up the brain and get it excited, making it pay attention to the outside world and making everything work more effectively. And that's going to happen throughout the brain. So the amygdala is going to activate those neurons to release all those chemicals, and they're going to go all over the brain and make everything more efficient. The idea is that in this state, what's happening is this simple stimulus, this threat in the world, has monopolized your brain. It's taken over. And the reason it does that is to keep you alive. Now, sometimes this happens in situations where we don't necessarily need it to happen. And we're constantly fretting about things and worrying and being afraid of things. And this can cause us to have a fear or anxiety disorder. So this system is so effective in dealing with natural dangers that the brain has it. But sometimes it gets sort of sidetracked and gets involved in things that we don't want to be afraid of. And it's very hard to turn it off once that happens because the system is so wonderfully effective in doing what it's supposed to do. Now, up on top there, at the top of all this stuff, which you can't see, is the word feeling afraid. So feeling fear is something that's happening. It's a sort of the last step in all of this. It's what happens as you emerge. So you walk out onto Michigan Avenue, and a bus goes flying by. You notice that you've already jumped back, and now you feel afraid because your brain is able to detect that danger and respond to it. And fear is a late result. The feeling of fear is a late result. And this is a kind of sidetrack point, but I just want to make it that a lot of what I've been writing about lately is saying that we shouldn't be calling all this other stuff fear. Fear is only that last thing. Let's call fear what everybody thinks fear is, that feeling of being afraid. And all this other stuff are just sort of neural ingredients that contribute to that, but aren't necessarily evolved for the purpose of making you afraid. But I don't want to go into too much detail on that. I'll just skip to just how we study this. So here's a rat in a chamber, and the rat will get a sound paired with a shock, and then it will get the sound alone, and as a result of that, the rat will then, in the presence of the sound, express all these behaviors: freezing behavior, increases in blood pressure, heart rate, respiration, stress hormones are released. All of this is happening from this conditioning process. So rats and people are obviously afraid of different things, but the way the brain and body responds is very similar. That's why we can study rats and have it be relevant for understanding human fear. So we know a lot about what goes on inside the amygdala, and again, I'm not going to go through the details. We're going to put it back into a larger circuit and just say that we know the neuroanatomy of all those pieces that I've been talking about, how they all fit together and how they work. And we even know a lot about the cells and synapses and molecules that make all of that happen. And this is the basis for then developing new approaches to treat fear-related disorders on the basis of all the stuff we discovered.